If someone knocked on your door every night at midnight for 10 nights in a row, would you dare open it? Catherine Hollis didn't. Not at first. She had moved deep into the woods of Washington after a bitter divorce, seeking silence, solitude, and maybe peace. But then came the knocks. 3, heavy, deliberate, each one followed by a low, aching moan, and the soft scrape of something desperate against the wooden door. On the 12th night, she set up an old camcorder. What it captured wasn't a bear, wasn't a man. It was a creature, nearly 7 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown fur, leaning its forehead against her door and crying. Catherine had been a school counselor for over 20 years. She knew those eyes, that silent plea. It wasn't a monster out there. It was a child, lost, wounded, just looking for safety. This story isn't about fear. It's about trust, about opening the door when the world tells you to shut it tight. And maybe, just maybe, about how healing doesn't always come in human form. Where are you watching this from, dear friend? What's your name? I wonder how far this story can travel, how many hearts it might reach. If this touched yours, give it a like, subscribe, and help us build a quiet, kind community. For those of us who still believe Bigfoot just might be real, and might just be good. The old pendulum clock on the cabin wall let out its final chime. 12 slow, hollow beats that filled the wooden room like distant thunder rolling through the valley. The fire had dimmed into embers. Outside, the pines whispered in the cold. Then, right as the silence settled back into place, 3 knocks. Heavy, even, not rushed, not random. Kate Hollis sat up in bed, her body rigid beneath the flannel sheets, her ears strained into the stillness. She wasn't dreaming. Those knocks hadn't come from her mind. They had come from the door. She waited, holding her breath. Nothing. Just wind. Just the faint creak of a roof beam adjusting to the drop in temperature. But she knew what she'd heard. She reached for the old Louisville slugger propped against her nightstand. It had once belonged to her ex-husband, back when he still played in the company league and before everything fell apart. The bat still had his initials scratched near the handle. Kate stepped softly across the hardwood floor, each step letting out a small groan from beneath her feet. The cabin was small, just 3 rooms, built deep in the woods on the 40 acres of untamed pine and underbrush. No neighbors, no streetlights. The road ended 2 miles back in a soft bend where the dirt met gravel, just enough space to disappear, which was why she had come. 3 years ago, her divorce finalized with nothing but a cold signature and her daughter Mara choosing to stay with her father in Spokane. That choice had cracked something in Kate that never quite healed. She'd left behind the school where she'd spent 15 years as a guidance counselor. Left behind the halls full of kids, some kind, some cruel, and the memories of the ones she couldn't save. One boy in particular, with bruises no one believed. His name still haunted the pages of her journals. So now, this was her life. A quiet cabin, a fire that needed tending, a shelf of books she'd already read twice, and a phone that rarely rang. "I just want to hear trees more than people," she'd told her sister before leaving. But even the trees tonight had gone still. She moved toward the front door, the bat gripped tight in both hands. No lights on, just the low orange flicker from the fireplace behind her. She stopped by the window and parted the curtain with 2 fingers, just enough to see the porch. Nothing, only shadows and snow gathering along the railings. No footsteps, no figure in the dark. But the wood had vibrated with those knocks. It wasn't wind. It wasn't age. Something had been there. Then a sound came. A long, low moan. Not human, not entirely animal either. It rumbled like something pained. A soft scratching followed, just under the doorknob. Not clawing, not violent. More like asking. Kate didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward, listening with everything in her. The scratching stopped. Silence again. And then, slow, deliberate footsteps moving away. The weight of them made the porch boards groan. 1, 2, then gone. She stood there for a long time after, not even realizing her knuckles had gone white around the bat's handle. The next morning, she opened the door with care. The porch held no answers, not at first glance. Then she spotted it, a faint smear of mud along the base of the door, like a palm had been dragged across it. No animal she knew left marks like that, and the steps in the dirt were deep, broad. The shape was distorted by melting frost, but the impression was enough to raise the hairs along her arm. That night, it happened again. 12 chimes, 3 knocks. The same moan, the same soft scrape. And again the next. By the 5th night, Kate had stopped sleeping. She stayed in her robe by the fire with a bat across her lap and a notebook beside her. Old habits returned like ghosts, her counselor's instinct to document what she couldn't understand. She wrote, 12:00 a.m., 3 knocks, heavy, consistent, scratching, gentle, deliberate, moan, lower in pitch tonight, sad, frustrated. Each night she added more, the rhythm of the knocks, the sound of the wind, her own heartbeats in the silence. She didn't know why she was keeping track. It just felt right, like something would make sense if she just paid enough attention. Then one night, she got brave, or foolish. She pulled back the curtain just a few inches as the knocks came, and there it was, a shape, broad, towering, blocking the weak porch light. It stood taller than the door frame, upright on 2 legs. The outline wasn't hunched like a bear. The movement wasn't erratic like a moose. It was still, waiting. Kate slammed the curtain shut, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. She backed into the wall and slid down to the floor, her breath ragged. The next morning the mud was back, this time smeared in a long arc, as if a hand had been pressed then slowly dragged down the door. She stared at it, chills crawling down her spine, not from fear this time, but from something else. Pity, maybe. Confusion. Wonder. Later that day, she took a drive down the old trail road to see Raymond Cole, the only human soul within a few miles. He was 70-something, wore the same flannel coat all year round, and spent most of his days chopping wood or listening to his old radio. He squinted at the muddy photo she'd snapped of the smear, his fingers trembling slightly as he held it. "Probably a bear," she offered, waiting for the laugh. But Raymond didn't smile. He just stared longer than felt normal, his brows pulling together. "There are things," he finally said, voice low, "that live closer to the trees than to us. Most folks forget about them until they come knockin'." Kate frowned. "Like what?" He didn't answer directly, just looked her dead in the eye and said, "If they're knocking, Kate, they ain't hunting. They're desperate, real desperate. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and listen to what your heart's telling you." His words trailed behind her like fog as she drove back. That night, she sat with the phone in her hand. The police in town weren't more than 6 deputies. She could call. She could report strange behavior. But her eyes fell on an old note tucked into her journal, an emergency number scrawled by a student from years ago. One she couldn't help in time. She stared at the number for a long time, then set the phone back in its cradle. She couldn't do it, because if she called the authorities, and they came with guns, and whatever it was out there wasn't dangerous, just lost or wounded or young, then she'd be responsible for its death. Again, that night Kate didn't bring the bat to bed. She pulled the quilt tight around her shoulders and sat on the floor, back to the door, just listening. The clock struck 12, 3 knocks, just like always. She closed her eyes, whispered into the dark, "If it wanted to hurt me, it would have done it the first night. So, what is it you need?" Outside, the wind howled through the trees. But inside that tiny cabin in the woods, Kate Hollis sat very still, one hand resting softly against the wood where the knocks had come, and something far older than fear began to grow. Something gentler. A question not of escape, but of invitation. The kind that changes everything. The camera would have caught her if anyone were watching. Bare feet on cold wood. A woman kneeling in front of an old cabinet, hands wrapped tight in a worn knit sweater. Breath fogging in the morning light. Kate pulled the drawer open with a soft creak and reached behind a stack of expired utility bills and a tangled measuring tape. Her fingers touched it. Metal. Weighty. The high-8 camcorder hadn't seen daylight in years. Still smelled faintly like garage dust and motor oil. She set it on the kitchen table like a ritual object, stared at it for a long time, then whispered, more to herself than the room, "If I'm going to be afraid, at least I want to know what I'm afraid of." That night she checked the tape. Blank. Rewound. Click. The battery blinked red, but it held. She pointed the camera toward the fireplace and pressed record. The screen buzzed faintly. She panned to the bookshelves, to the bat still leaning beside the door, to the soft dent in her pillow on the couch. A test. Just to get the feel. Then she wrapped a Ziploc bag over the camcorder, tied it with twine, and stepped outside. The porch light flickered as always. She tied the camera clumsily to the porch railing with 2 belts and a bungee cord she'd found in the shed. It hung there, tilted slightly, pointing straight at the front door. The forest was breathing slowly around her, the same cold hush it always carried after midnight. She stood back, checking the angle. Nodded once. Inside, she left only the lamp above the stove on, set the camcorder to record, and sat on the couch, arms around her knees. Waiting. Midnight came like it always did. The old clock on the wall sighed out its 12 metallic chimes. Kate flinched anyway when the knocking began. 3 hits. Solid, rhythmic. Something in them almost felt careful. She stayed put this time, wrapped in her blanket, her body stiff, her mind racing. The sounds followed. The familiar whimpering moan, the scrape of something across the door. Then footsteps. Slow, dragging, moving off into the woods. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. The fire had burned low by the time she opened the door at dawn, grabbed the camcorder, and shut herself inside. She made coffee with shaking hands. Then she sat down and pressed rewind. The tape rolled back. The screen went black for a beat. Then static. Then the porch. Nothing for a few seconds. Then it came. First, just a shadow shifting across the edge of the frame. Then more defined. Movement behind the far pillar. A shoulder, an arm. The figure stepped into view. Kate's breath caught in her throat. It was tall, broad, covered in wet reddish-brown hair. Upright. Bipedal. Not human, not exactly. Not ape either. No snout, no swinging arms like a gorilla. Just a hunched, exhausted posture. Its chest rose and fell heavily. The shape moved with purpose, but no aggression. It stopped in front of the door, raised one massive hand, knocked. Kate's hands trembled as she paused the tape. She zoomed. The screen blurred for a moment before sharpening into the grainy outline of a face. Not clear, but not monstrous. Deep eyes, a flattened nose, hair matted along the brow line like a messy crown. The creature lowered its head until its forehead rested against the door. The movement didn't look feral. It looked tired. She let the tape play on. It stood there for what felt like a lifetime. Then it turned, limped away, out of frame. Kate paused again. She rewound a few seconds. There, a thin scar, running from just beneath the left collarbone, down across the chest. Darker than the surrounding skin. Jagged. Healed badly. She leaned closer. That kind of wound didn't happen in the wild without leaving something behind. Trapwire, maybe. Or a fight. Her gut twisted. Then she played it once more, watching only the eyes this time. The face was rough, yes. Hair hung over the brows. But the eyes, they were bright, wide, too wide for any forest predator. They held fear, but also recognition. The camcorder's lens had caught something Kate hadn't prepared for, an expression. She knew that look. She'd seen it in classrooms, on the faces of boys who sat alone. Boys who flinched when someone raised their voice. One in particular, who'd once whispered through cracked lips, "It's okay if nobody sees me. I'm used to that." Kate had found him bruised and bleeding in the gym stairwell the next week. She'd filed a report. The school board had done nothing. Her throat tightened. She turned the camcorder off and pushed it aside. That evening, Kate stood at the kitchen counter cutting apples into thin slices. She spread peanut butter on bread, added a few slices of chicken from the fridge. She didn't think too hard about it. Just moved as if her hands already knew the steps. She placed everything carefully on a white plate, then added something else, an old fleece scarf. It had once been her daughter's, back before everything frayed. She cracked the door, placed the plate on the porch, and stepped back. Just a few feet. Enough to see, not to confront. She turned off all the lights except the porch lamp, which flickered gently overhead. The wind sighed, and then he came. From the trees, the figure emerged like it always had. Cautious, slow, shoulders slightly hunched. Kate didn't move. She didn't breathe. He paused at the edge of the porch light, just out of reach. His eyes gleamed for a moment, amber catching firelight. Then, one step forward. Another. He reached the plate. Sniffed, looked toward the door. He must have seen her then, behind the curtain. Kate didn't flinch. The creature slowly dragged the plate toward the steps, sat on the topmost board, and began to eat. Not ravenously, just hungry. The bread disappeared first, then the chicken. The apples he took his time with, holding each slice delicately between two long fingers. When he finished, he placed the empty plate gently back near the door. Then he looked toward her again. Kate stood completely still. The moment stretched. He reached one hand out, not toward her, but toward the frame of the door. His massive palm pressed flat against the wood. Held there. One long breath. Then he turned and walked away. Kate didn't sleep that night either. But not from fear. In the morning, she picked up the empty plate, washed it in the sink, dried it carefully. Then, without thinking, she set it beside the picture of her and Mara on the mantel, next to a rusted horseshoe and a pine cone her daughter had once painted gold. Later, she sat down and opened her notebook. She didn't know what she'd write, but her hand moved anyway. She wrote, "It's not just fear, not anymore. It's recognition." That night, she placed another plate on the porch. The next night, too. Each time, the same thing happened. He came, he ate, he returned the plate. Sometimes he left nothing behind. But one night, Kate found something new. A small stone, river smooth, flat, and smeared in a swirl of dark brown mud across the center. Not random, not accidental. A spiral, drawn with a finger. It lay exactly where the plate usually sat. Kate picked it up with both hands, turned it over, felt the weight. She stood in the doorway for a long while, the wind pressing gently against her flannel sleeves. Then she walked inside and placed the stone on the mantel, just beneath the photo of her daughter. She didn't question why. Some part of her understood. That night, as she sat near the fire, she looked at the plate, then at the stone, then at the photo. Her heart beat slower than usual, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, a kind of settling. She remembered a boy once, a quiet one, who'd made her a paper airplane with her name scrawled on the wings. She'd kept it in her desk drawer until the day she left the school. Her eyes drifted to the stone again. This time she would not throw the gift away. This time she would not fail to keep it. She leaned back in the chair, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and whispered into the firelight, "Maybe it's a child, just not the kind I've known before." And outside, beyond the trees, something very old and very quiet took a step closer. Kate stood at the kitchen counter, the blade of the paring knife whispering rhythmically through a red apple. Her movements were unhurried, almost tender. She lined the slices in a neat fan on the ceramic plate. 2 thick slices of wheat bread followed, slathered with peanut butter that clung just slightly to the knife. A few pieces of leftover roasted chicken, still cold from the fridge, and a handful of baby carrots filled the final gaps. Then she hesitated, glanced toward the hallway closet, and pulled out an old wool blanket, its edges frayed and dotted with tiny pills of lint. She folded it twice and laid it over her arm like a peace offering. The wind outside tugged gently at the cabin, stirring brittle leaves against the windows. Kate stepped out onto the porch. Her breath came out white and slow. She set the plate and blanket down just beside the door, where the light from the porch lamp brushed across the floorboards. Then she opened the door an inch wider than before, not enough to invite, but enough to be seen. The first nights passed in a careful rhythm. She'd place the plate down around dusk, retreat behind the screen door, and wait in the armchair just inside. The cabin always smelled faintly of pine smoke and old paper, and when she sat with the lights low, it felt as though the walls held their breath with her. Outside, the forest remained solemn. Then, he would come. Each time, the same shape. That tall, loping figure moving through the trees like shadow poured into skin. He'd stay just at the edge of light at first, half curious, half bracing. Slowly, he began to step closer, until the porch light crowned his shoulders in amber. He never rushed, never threatened, just watched. Then he'd reach down, gather the plate, and carry it back to the top step like it was something fragile. He ate with surprising stillness, fingers long and deliberate. Once, she saw him break a carrot in half before eating, as if he'd learned to savor. Afterward, he'd always place the plate back exactly where he'd found it, clean, centered, with care that didn't seem instinctual. One evening, Kate did something new. When he lifted his gaze from the plate, she raised her hand slowly. A quiet wave, her palm open, not stiff, just there. He blinked, then looked at his own hand, and, like a child mimicking a parent, he lifted it awkwardly, fingers out, movement unsure, and waved back. Kate's breath caught. She smiled without meaning to. He didn't smile, at least not in any human way, but his head tilted just slightly, as if he'd seen her emotion and placed it somewhere safe in his mind. In town, few people knew her name now. She'd withdrawn gradually, without drama. No one came up the mountain unless they had a reason. Except Jonah Whitmer, 15, tall for his age, sunburned cheeks and hands too big for his frame. He came once every week or two, hauling chopped firewood in the bed of his father's rusted Ford. He'd knock on the back door, call out Miss Kate, and always linger a little longer than necessary. That Thursday, he stepped inside with snow in his hair and a plastic bag of grocery store apples. "I heard something the other night," he said, unloading the apples on the counter. "Thumping, like banging on trees." Kate turned from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Probably just wind," she said, too quickly. "Could be," he replied. "But it was, I don't know, rhythmic. My uncle says it might be that thing, Bigfoot or whatever. Claims he heard knocks back in '84 up by Mill Creek." Kate didn't answer. Jonah grinned. "Do you believe in that stuff?" "I believe in being kind to whatever's out there," she said. He paused, then nodded slowly, as if that answered more than he expected. That night, Kate stood in the doorway again, this time with just one item in her hand. A red apple. She knelt, placed it on the ground between them, and stepped back. Then she pointed to it. "Apple," she said softly. "Apple." The creature, who now felt more like a presence than a mystery, tilted his head. his brow furrowed, lips parting slightly. Kate touched her chest, then pointed again. "Apple." He looked from her face to the fruit. Pa," he said, gravel-voiced, uncertain. Her eyes widened. "Yes," she breathed. "Apple." He tried again. Pla." She laughed, not loud, just a soft, startled exhale. And his eyes brightened. He repeated the sound, each time a little stronger, a little surer. Kate felt her throat tighten. That kind of pride. It was the same look she'd seen on a first grader who finally tied their shoes alone. She didn't realize her hand had moved to the bat by habit, but she let it go now. The next night, she didn't carry it at all. In its place, she brought out a bandage and a fresh cloth. No blood this time, just caution, a gesture. He noticed. He no longer lingered behind the light. He approached with slow steps, no longer watching the door as warily. When she spoke, he listened, not with language, but with stillness. And that meant more. One morning she stepped out and found no plate. Instead, there was a stone, not just any rock. This one was polished by river time, its surface smoothed to a gentle gleam. Across its top, a spiral drawn in damp mud. Deliberate, not random, not animal. Kate crouched, picked it up, turned it in her palm. She whispered, "You brought me something." She took it inside and placed it on the mantel, right beside the photograph of her and Mara. Mara at age 6, freckles and gap-toothed smile. That photo hadn't moved in years. Now, the stone sat beside it, like it belonged. That evening she sat in front of the fire with the stone in her lap. She ran her thumb along the dried spiral, tracing the pattern again and again. Her thoughts drifted, not to myths or to folklore, but to something smaller, more personal. She'd once known a boy, 16, thin, never smiled. He left a pebble on her desk once. No note, just the rock. When she asked, he mumbled, "It reminded me of your earrings." She wore cheap spiral earrings then. She never told anyone, just kept it in her drawer. Later that year, he disappeared. She never forgot that pebble. Kate looked down at the stone now. This time she would keep it. She got up and set it beside the photo again, this time angling it just so. A small, strange act of reverence. Over the next few nights, things shifted. When Kate opened the door, she no longer flinched. He no longer hesitated. She stood taller now, sometimes with a towel over her arm like a hostess, sometimes with a new word. Water, blanket, warm. He didn't always mimic, but he always listened. His attention was sharp, alert, human in its intensity. One night she said, "Home," just once, while pointing toward the forest. He startled, not visibly, but his breath caught. Then he pointed to his chest, then the trees, then back to her. The message was clear. He knew what home meant, and he knew this place wasn't it. But still, he came back. Still, he brought stones. Still, he mimicked her hand waves and her slow, careful words. The last night of October, a storm rolled in early. Kate opened the door just enough to slide the plate out. He wasn't there yet. But later, when she opened it again to retrieve the dish, she found a new stone. This one bore 2 spirals, side by side, intertwined just enough. Kate didn't speak. She simply stood there, holding it. The sound of rain tapping soft against the metal roof. The fire flickered behind her. The wind breathed its secrets through the trees, and in her hands, something ancient and wordless pulsed quietly, like trust, like memory, like a promise no one else had asked for, but somehow she'd been chosen to keep. She placed the new stone beside the first one, then added a third, a small carved figure her daughter had made years ago, barely shaped like a dog. The line was forming, the circle was starting, and somewhere out in the trees, someone knew. The next chapter had already begun. The nights had grown sharp and metallic, slicing through the pines like a whisper that knew too much. By early December, the earth had crusted over with frost and silence. Even the birds had gone. The cabin stood like a lone matchstick in the chill, chimney whispering smoke into a sky that never seemed to fully brighten. Kate had begun sleeping with wool socks and a second blanket, though she rarely slept through. Her body was still, but her ears were always listening. That night, the knocks came late. Not precisely at 12 like before, not in their usual rhythm. The first knock was dull, like a body slumping against the door. The second staggered. The third never came. Kate was already rising from the couch, pulling her flannel coat on over her sweater. Her breath caught. Something in her chest tightened. Instinct more than thought. She grabbed the flashlight, clicked it on. The beam wavered against the frosted window pane. When she opened the door, wind rushed in first. Then the smell. Metal, pine sap, wet fur, and blood. He was there, crouched at the base of the porch like a wounded elk. His left leg stretched awkwardly in front of him, fur matted in a slow, steady trail of red. His chest moved in labored gasps, steam rising from his body like smoke. His shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from something colder, deeper. Kate didn't flinch. She stepped forward one pace. He raised his eyes to her. The same amber gleam, only dimmer now. His breathing was uneven, shallow. His hands didn't move. She dropped to her knees, about 4 feet away, and laid the flashlight down gently so the beam spread low across the porch. No sudden movements. She unzipped the small first-aid pouch she'd brought from inside, then pointed at the wound on his leg. Her voice was quiet. "Help, I can help." He blinked. His mouth opened just slightly, but nothing came out. Then, with visible effort, he shifted his weight. One massive hand lifted, slow, deliberate, and patted his chest twice. A low grunt rose from his throat. Not pain. Something closer to surrender. Kate nodded once. She unscrewed the cap from the bottle of saline. The scent of disinfectant immediately bit at the cold air. She dipped a clean rag in the solution and inched forward. The wound was worse than she feared. A deep gash above the ankle, torn ragged at the edges. The fur was clumped with blood, dried in streaks that had long frozen. As she brushed gently across the edges of the wound, he let out a low groan, muscles rippling beneath the skin like coiled ropes. She saw it then, just beneath the skin, glinting in the flashlight's beam. Wire. A thin piece of snare cable embedded along the outer edge of the wound. Its tip had curled like a hook inside the meat. She hissed softly under her breath, barely audible. "Trap." She met his gaze. He didn't look away. She pointed to the wire, then back to him. "I have to take it out. It'll hurt." He didn't move. But his breathing changed, shorter now. His jaw clenched. She watched his fingers twitch once. Then he exhaled hard and closed his eyes. Kate reached for the tweezers. The first tug made his leg jerk. His hand shot up by reflex, just inches from her wrist, claws extended. She froze. He did too. The porch light flickered. And then, in that frozen heartbeat, he pulled his hand away, slowly, deliberately, his claws scraping softly against the wood. He planted his palm flat, pressed it down hard as if to anchor himself. His other hand opened toward her. He was giving her permission again. Kate bit her lip and went back to work. It took nearly 10 minutes to remove the wire. By the end, her hands were shaking. His breathing was ragged. The wound looked raw, open, but cleaner. She wrapped it with gauze, tied it firm, but not tight. He didn't move through the process, but once, when her fingers brushed too close to the bone, he made a sound, somewhere between a breath and a cry. Something guttural, buried. Kate didn't ask for more. When she finished, she sat back against the porch railing and looked at him. He was watching her. No judgment, just eyes. Then, slowly, he reached out. His hand, massive, dark, thick with fur, came to rest on her shoulder. Not hard, just warm, solid. His thumb brushed once, like someone searching for a word they didn't have the tongue to speak. She didn't move. Then he made a sound, deep, humming, drawn from the bottom of his chest. Ha, ooh, low, resonant, almost like a note from a forgotten lullaby. Kate closed her eyes. The sound settled in her bones like something sacred. "You're safe here," she whispered. Later, when the cold pushed harder, she laid a blanket over him. He didn't protest, just curled slightly at the edge of the porch, breath slow, chest rising in the rhythm of someone no longer afraid of the night. At dawn, she found him still sleeping, one hand resting across his chest. The snow had come lightly, just enough to dust the tops of the trees and cling to the tips of the grass like frost caught in time. The fire inside the cabin had gone out hours ago, but she didn't relight it. She just stood at the doorway, watching. The next day, Kate followed the trail of blood deeper into the woods. The steps were wide, heavy. She saw where he'd collapsed. Then farther on, something else, the trap, snapped open, half buried in the underbrush. Metal teeth rusted at the hinge, dried blood on one edge, a patch of reddish fur still tangled in the clamp. She didn't hesitate. She raised the hammer she'd brought from the shed and struck it hard. Once, twice, 3 times, until the hinge warped and cracked and the whole thing folded in on itself. She kept striking even after that. Not for function, just because. Then she buried it, 6 inches down, beneath pine needles and frozen soil. She stood back, breathing hard, sweat running cold down her back. And for the first time in years, she felt anger. Not grief, not guilt. Real, cutting, human anger. That night, when he returned, he walked more slowly. The bandage still held. His movements had changed, more careful now. But he didn't hesitate at the porch. He stepped closer than usual. His shadow brushed against the wall of the cabin. Kate opened the door wider. He reached into the pouch of fur at his side, something she hadn't seen before, and pulled out a small branch, twisted, smooth, the end carved by hand or claw into a soft spiral. He laid it gently at her feet, a thank you, in his way. She bent to pick it up, the wood warm from his body. When she looked up, he was still watching. She held it to her chest, then nodded. In the days that followed, he stayed close. Some nights he didn't come to eat, just sat at the edge of the trees, visible only in silhouette. Once, she heard him mimic a sound she'd made the day before, an offhand laugh at the radio static. It wasn't perfect, but it was familiar. The line between them had shifted. She no longer marked the calendar with visitor or event. It was just part of the rhythm now, like rain, like hunger, like memory. And as December deepened, and the cabin grew smaller in the vastness of winter, Kate found herself saying things out loud when he wasn't there. Simple things. Be careful out there. See you tomorrow. Or sometimes just thank you to no one in particular, because kindness was never one way. It just moved in circles, like footprints that never faded. Even in snow, even in time. The storm didn't come with warning. It arrived with a silence too thick, a sky too still. The kind of hush that presses down on the trees and makes even the crows fall quiet. By late afternoon, the wind had started to moan across the ridgelines, and Kate knew. The air changed, sharp, electric, like the whole mountain had taken in a breath and didn't want to let it go. By dusk, the snow was coming down sideways, fat flakes slashed by gusts of wind, smearing across the windows like white noise. The kind of storm that doesn't just fall, but hunts. Kate triple-checked the wood stove, loaded another log, and lit the emergency lamp near the couch. The power lines out here weren't built for this. Nothing really was. The cabin creaked like an old man's knees. She could hear the nails groan in the boards. Then came the knocks. Not at midnight. Earlier, somewhere near 10, but different this time. 3 strikes, yes, but off balance. Unsteady. The first one strong, the second one weaker, the third more like a thud, a body resting rather than a hand calling. Kate didn't hesitate. She already had her coat on when she opened the door. The wind grabbed it and flung it wide, snow curling in like smoke. And there he was, cinder, soaked, shaking. His fur was matted with ice, flakes clinging to his face, his shoulders, his legs. The bandage on his wounded leg was soaked through, red seeping up through the white like a warning light. His breaths came in hard bursts, clouds of steam curling from his mouth. But it was his eyes, that same look, not pain, not even fear, just the quiet collapse of someone who can't take another night alone. Kate stepped forward. No words. She reached out and took his wrist, gently like you would with something ancient, and gave the lightest tug. "Come in." He didn't move at first. He stared at the door frame, at the threshold, then down at the wooden plank beneath his feet, now dusted in snow. His other hand reached down, tracing his fingers across the lower edge of the threshold. Slowly, reverently, like it was something sacred. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but something older. He looked up at her, back down, then a shift. He lowered his head, pressed his palm against the wood, and stepped inside. Kate closed the door behind him. The wind howled against it like a warning shot, but the latch held. The cabin now smelled of damp fur and pine bark and raw winter. He stood there, still dripping, steam rising from his back like he carried the storm inside his skin. He didn't move further, just stood near the door, silent. Kate grabbed a thick towel from the back of the chair and held it out. "You're safe. It's okay now." He didn't take the towel, just watched her. So she stepped closer, carefully, slowly, and she dried him. First his arms, then his shoulders. He allowed it. Not limp, not shy. Just present, participating. He blinked when the towel brushed his face. She offered it to him then, and he finished drying himself. Slow, careful strokes, like someone who'd once watched a mother do it for a child. Then he saw the fireplace. That was when his gaze changed. He walked toward it, legs stiff from cold, and stood in front of the flames. Not too close, just enough to feel it. The light danced across his soaked fur. Kate moved around him, grabbing the old woven blanket from the couch, laying it down near the hearth like a dog bed, but wider, softer. She placed another log into the stove. Sparks flew. He turned. She pointed to the blanket. He looked down at it. Back at her. Then he sat. It was awkward. His knees bent wrong for the space. But he folded himself there, a shape too wild for the room and yet, somehow, belonging. The cabin went quiet again, the storm now muffled by thick logs and new warmth. Kate moved around the kitchen softly, not wanting to break whatever spell had settled. She poured warm water into a mug, then remembered the word they'd been practicing. She turned to him, holding the cup. "Water." He blinked. "Water," she said again, tapping the mug. He tilted his head. "Water," he rasped, then looked surprised by his own voice. Kate laughed gently and handed him the cup. His hands engulfed it. Steam curled up into his nose. He sniffed once, then sipped. His shoulders softened, just a little. Later, she brought out a bowl of leftover soup and slices of bread. He ate with his back to the fire, eyes never leaving hers for long. She taught him another word. "Fire." He said it slower. Blanket, she tried next, touching the one beneath him. He touched it too. "Blank." "Home," she said last, and that changed everything. His eyes sharpened. His face turned serious. He placed a hand on his chest, then pointed to the window, then back to the forest, and then to her. The meaning was clear. This wasn't home, but it was something, a pause in the cold, a place between places. Kate nodded. "Yeah, just for now." He blinked slowly, his version of agreement. That night she fell asleep in the reading chair, a book open on her lap. The fire hissed and popped. At some point, the book slid to the floor, pages spreading like wings. Cinder saw it happen. He rose, slow, stiff, and picked the book up, mimicking how she held it. Then he reached for the other blanket, pulled it gently across her shoulders. His massive hand patted it once, unsure. Then he sat, on the floor beside her, facing the door, watching like a sentinel, like someone who finally had something to protect. In the middle of the night, the storm broke briefly. The trees stopped thrashing, the sky thinned, and moonlight filtered through the kitchen window. It was then Kate stirred, half asleep, and saw them. Beyond the window, two shapes, tall, still, just past the tree line, not moving forward, not leaving, just watching. The light from the window lit their silhouettes. One broader, the other taller. They didn't knock, didn't growl, just stood, waiting. Cinder stood too. He didn't growl either. He walked to the window, raised his hand slowly, didn't wave, just pressed his palm to the glass, then stepped back. The other shapes remained a moment longer, then melted back into the trees. Kate didn't say anything. She just looked at the boy, because he was one now, wasn't he? Not beast, not boy. Something between. Something she'd been given. And something slowly she was beginning to trust. The next morning the cabin smelled of wood smoke and wet fur and cinnamon. The snow outside had drifted knee-high, sculpting white dunes across the trail. The world was hushed. Kate stood at the stove stirring oatmeal when she looked back. He was still asleep. Blanket tangled around his legs, arm draped over the mat. Breathing slow, safe, and the door, still locked, still whole, but no longer the boundary it used to be. And somewhere outside, in the distant hush of snow settling on pines, the forest waited, patient, ancient, and watching. Because something had changed, and soon something would come calling again. Winter didn't end in one day. It backed off slowly, like an old man rising from a chair, creaking, lingering, reluctant to leave. The snow around Kate's cabin began to melt in patches, pulling away from tree roots and rocks. The earth showed its skin again, damp, dark, alive. The pines dripped all day and refroze at night. The wind changed tone, from groaning to whispering. Cinder felt it first. He began pacing by the window. Every morning, standing in that same spot where sunlight broke through the condensation and laid a gold bar across the wooden floor. He'd press his nose to the glass and breathe deep, as if tasting something the human eye couldn't see. Then his head would tilt slightly, listening. Somewhere out there, the forest was calling again. He didn't say it. Didn't need to. Kate knew. The boy she'd let inside her world had never been meant to stay. He belonged to something larger, something older, and now that something was drawing him back. He hadn't knocked in weeks, not because he'd lost the habit, but because the door no longer held meaning between them. He came and went without ritual, sometimes returning just after dawn, bringing in snow on his shoulders, sometimes vanishing until twilight, only to appear with bark stuck in his fur or pine needles tangled between his toes. But one morning she opened the door and stopped short. Right at the edge of the trees, lined in a perfect row, was a set of river stones, flat, smooth, each spaced exactly the same apart. They stretched in a line, not toward her, but parallel to the cabin's edge, tracing the forest line like a boundary, or a message. Kate stepped barefoot into the frost-damp grass and crouched beside them. There were 5 stones. Each one had a small smear of dried mud, finger-drawn, some in circles, some in short vertical strokes, all deliberate. She stood and looked up. Just above her, on a branch low enough for her to reach without stretching, hung a length of grass, dry, braided tightly into a loop. It swayed gently in the breeze, its shadow flickering on the side of the cabin like a second heartbeat. Not a prank, not human. They were letting her know something. Not asking permission, not giving it either, just marking presence. We see you, we remember. Inside, Kate placed the first stone beside the old ones on the mantel. The others she arranged on the porch railing. She didn't know why. Only that it felt like the right way to say, I see you back. Cinder didn't come that night, or the night after. But on the 3rd evening, he returned. Mud on his ankles, a small scratch on his cheek. He didn't speak, didn't point. He just sat near the fire again, that old blanket curled under his knees, watching, waiting, as if he sensed something was about to shift. Then the phone rang. Kate hadn't heard it in days, maybe weeks. She barely remembered what the tone sounded like. It startled her. She picked it up like it might bite. "Mara," she said. Her daughter's voice came through warm, crackly, a little tired, a little lighter. "Yeah, hi, Mom." A pause. "I was thinking of coming up, just for a few days, if that's okay." Kate swallowed. Her hand trembled slightly. "Of course." She didn't mention Cinder, didn't mention the stones, didn't mention the way the forest watched her now like it remembered her name. She just cleaned. She made the bed in the back room, swept pine needles from the rug, wiped down the counter twice, then a third time, set out a new bar of soap by the sink. And when Mara arrived, hours later, in a borrowed SUV with a scarf too thin for mountain wind, Kate hugged her longer than she meant to. Mara was 19 now. Jeans, boots, denim jacket over a flannel shirt. Hair tied up in a messy knot. Still carried that edge of distance in her voice, but there was warmth under it. Curiosity. They sat at the table that night, eating reheated stew and talking about small things. City noise, college lectures, a roommate who didn't understand boundaries. They didn't push. They didn't apologize. They just shared space. And in the shed behind the cabin, Cinder waited. Kate had told him without words, "Stay, quiet. Mara can't see you, not yet." But that night, as mother and daughter talked, Kate noticed the way Mara glanced toward the woodshed. Once, then again. Her brow furrowed. "You keep something in there?" she asked. "Just tools," Kate said quickly. Mara nodded, but didn't look away. The next evening, after Kate had gone to bed early with a headache, Mara wandered outside. The snow had receded to thin crusts along the edge of the cabin. Stars were out, sharp as glass. She stepped lightly, mug in hand, and headed toward the porch railing to breathe. That's when she saw it. A shape, not tall, not small. Bent at the knees, shoulders curved, reaching carefully toward the top step. She froze. He froze. Cinder, holding a flat stone in his palm, brushing fresh mud into a spiral with one claw. Their eyes met, both still, both startled. Then Kate appeared in the doorway. Barefoot, pale. She stepped between them, didn't raise her voice, didn't explain, just reached out, placing a hand on Cinder's chest. The gesture so practiced, so human. Then she turned to Mara. "It's okay," she said. "He's been here for months." Mara stared, her face shifting between terror, disbelief, and something softer. Recognition. Kate spoke again. "I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call anyone, because if I had, he'd be gone, or worse." Mara's hand dropped to her side. She looked at Cinder, then at the bandage still wrapped around his leg, then at the stone he still held. "He brought that." Kate nodded. Mara stepped forward slowly, until she stood near the bottom step. "He's not what I thought." Cinder didn't move. She knelt, reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a pencil and a small sketch pad. Then, with one eye on him, she began to draw, fast, focused. When she finished the outline, she held it up, showed him his own shape, captured in graphite lines and gentle curves. He leaned in, sniffed the paper, touched the sketch with one claw, then pointed to himself, then her. A question. Mara smiled, small, stunned. "I see you," she whispered. The next morning, all three stood at the edge of the forest. Kate, Mara, Cinder, and in the distance, shadows moved. Not one, two, taller, broader, watching. They didn't emerge, just stood there, a family suspended in branches. Then, from deep in his chest, Cinder made a sound, a long, slow tone, rising and falling. Not random, not pain, song. The shadows responded. Two tones, one deep, one high. Mara reached for Kate's hand. "What are they saying?" Kate didn't answer. Cinder turned, faced her, his face tight with questions. Not words, but something she understood anyway. Am I supposed to go? Is it time? Will you be okay? Kate couldn't speak. She just touched his arm, then pointed to his chest, then to the forest, then back to her. You are loved. There and here, always. Cinder blinked, then nodded, then stepped back. Mara watched as he disappeared into the trees, that same spiral stone still clutched in one hand, sketch in the other. The forest closed behind him, but the space he left behind stayed open, and Kate knew what came next would ask even more of her. Because winter had passed, and nothing stays hidden forever. There was something hollow in the cabin the morning after he left. Kate woke to silence. Not the quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that sits too still, like something's missing. The air felt stripped. No soft breathing by the hearth. No shift of weight on the floorboards. No fur caught on the edge of the blanket. Just her. A half-empty cup on the nightstand, and the sound of the woods exhaling through the windows. She didn't cry. Not then. She moved around the cabin like someone walking through a house they hadn't built. Distant. Hands brushing over surfaces that used to hold warmth. The pot of coffee brewed, but she forgot to pour it. The wood pile was high, but the fire she lit was small. In her mind, she kept replaying that moment. His amber eyes looking back before vanishing into the pines, the spiral stone still gripped in his hand. That sound he made, low and uncertain. It hadn't been a goodbye. Not really. But it was enough to make her chest ache. For 2 days, Kate didn't step past the porch. Not because she was afraid. Because she didn't want to face how empty the trees felt. They'd once watched her with breath, with intent. Now they simply stood, still and cold. But on the 3rd day, something shifted. It came as a knock. Not on the door, on the wall. 3 soft taps, spaced out. Then silence. Then 2 more. Kate stood frozen in the kitchen, her dish towel hanging limply from her hand. Another knock. This time on the back of the cabin, near the woodshed. She stepped outside slowly, heart thudding. No one. Nothing. Just the trees, and the pale light of a morning too quiet for birdsong. But then she saw it, on the ground, at the edge where snow met soil. A stone, flat, marked with ash, and next to it, a long strand of fur, darker than cinders, coarser. Kate crouched, touched the edge of the fur. It wasn't just a message. It was a warning. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat near the fire, clutching the stone in one hand and her old lantern in the other. The house groaned around her. Wind scraped its claws across the window panes. Every creak made her flinch. She told herself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just the echo of missing someone who never fully belonged. But deep down she knew something else was near. Not him. Not the ones she'd glimpsed beyond the tree line. Different, and not kind. The next morning she checked the woodshed. At first glance, it looked untouched. But then she noticed the latch. Scratched, bent slightly out. Like something with long fingers had tested it. Inside, the crates had shifted. The blanket he'd once curled into was clawed through. Torn, as if someone had tried to erase his scent. Or claim it. She locked the shed, this time with a chain. By noon, clouds had gathered thick above the ridge. Heavy with the kind of snow that doesn't fall, but drops. Kate sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a thermos, watching the pines. And that's when she saw them. 2 sets of eyes. Not amber. Not intelligent. Dark. Unblinking. Low to the ground. Watching her from the underbrush like predators considering a step closer. She didn't move. Didn't blink. She just whispered under her breath, "I know you're not him." The eyes vanished. She didn't finish her coffee. That evening, Mara called. Kate didn't answer. She sat at the kitchen table, flipping through her journal. Not her own, but the old one. The one she hadn't touched since last winter. Her father's. He'd written things in code, in fragments, half-thoughts, jotted between lists of snow tires and lantern oil. But it was there. Mentions of sounds at night. Stones on the porch. A rustling in the trees that didn't match wind. Something not right. Not like the boy. Wild. Mean. She turned the page. A sketch, rough and hurried. A shape, like Cinder, but broader. Shoulders hunched, claws longer, mouth wider. He'd labeled it simply, The Others. Kate closed the book slowly, her breath caught in her throat. She lit every lantern in the house that night. And still, they came. Not inside, but closer. Knocks on the back wall. Then the side. Then something scratching along the roof line. She didn't sleep. Didn't blink. Just sat with the shotgun across her lap and the fire roaring hot enough to make the windows sweat. Dawn came like mercy. The trees were quiet. The ground was still. But the air smelled wrong, like copper and mold. She stepped outside, shotgun in hand, and found the porch smeared with muddy streaks. Not footprints, claw drags. They had circled her cabin and left nothing but silence. That afternoon, the wind changed. It carried something she hadn't heard in weeks. A knock. One, then two, then silence. But this one was different. Not on the walls, on the trees. She followed it, lantern in one hand, rifle slung across her shoulder. Each knock echoed through the woods like a drumbeat. Calling, or warning, it led her to the edge of the ridge. The same place Cinder had vanished. And there, at the base of a cedar, was a bundle. Leaves, bark, moss. She crouched, unwrapped it. Inside, a spiral stone, a sketch, her own, folded neatly, still faintly smelling of ash. And next to it, a second stone, not drawn on, but cracked down the middle. Kate stood, heart hammering. It wasn't just a message. It was a plea. Help, or danger. She turned toward the deeper woods, toward the snow-dim path that led down into the valley, then froze. The growl came low. Not animal, not human. It shuddered through the trees like a pulse, and from behind her, the softest sound of breath. She turned slowly. There he was. Cinder, scratched, leaner, eyes wide with fear. He didn't approach, just looked past her. Behind her, she turned again. The others stood at the edge. 3 of them, taller, narrower, eyes darker than pitch. They didn't charge. They just watched. And one lifted its hand, slowly, and mimicked the knock. 3 beats, then silence. Kate reached for her rifle. Cinder stepped in front of her, his arms outstretched, not in fear, in protection. And from his throat came that same tone he'd sung before. But this time it shook the trees, echoed through the bones. The others shifted, heads tilted. Then, as one, they turned and slipped back into the dark. Gone, just like that. Kate dropped the rifle. Cinder turned to her, stepped forward, and for the first time since he'd returned, leaned into her, forehead to her shoulder. She didn't say anything, just let her hand fall against his back. That night they sat by the fire again, blanket around his legs, her hand on the spiral stone. And she knew this wasn't the end. It was a warning. Something older was watching, and the forest had more secrets yet to tell. The sky over Blue Pine Ridge was the color of steel, a pale, heavy weight pressing down on the valley as if the clouds themselves had stopped breathing. Snow still blanketed the ground in thick silence, but it was the kind of quiet that didn't comfort. It warned. That hush before something breaks loose. Inside the cabin, Kate moved slowly, every movement precise. She packed nothing extra, only what mattered. 2 flares, a thermos of broth, a worn map marked with old ranger codes, and the ash-marked stone she'd kept on the windowsill since the morning he left. She stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the trees beyond the glass. The spiral etched in the stone almost seemed to pulse in the cold light. Then she slung the old pack over her shoulder, pulled her knit cap low, and stepped outside. He was waiting for her, not in the open, but near the edge of the clearing, crouched by the cedar where the old feeder used to hang. His shape was smaller now, thinner around the ribs, but his eyes, those amber eyes, locked on hers the moment she came into view. He rose slowly, head tilted, arms at his sides, like he wasn't sure if this was real or memory. Kate said nothing, just nodded once. He stepped forward, feet crunching on the iced-over crust of snow, and together they started walking. They moved wordlessly through the forest, following the trail he carved, past the fallen birch snag where she once hung wind chimes, past the creek that had frozen into pale ribbons beneath the ice. The woods grew denser. Shadows stretched longer. Branches seemed to lean in. The temperature dropped, the kind of cold that bit at your teeth and made your breath curl like ghosts. Hours passed. He led her down a ravine she'd never noticed before, a place where the pines thickened unnaturally, where the snow didn't reach the ground. She had to crouch to follow him through the tangle of roots and rock. Her boots slipped. He reached back once, gently, caught her wrist before she fell, then let go just as quickly. Then the forest opened up. A clearing, circular, silent. The snow here was untouched, and at the center stood a shape, tall, unmoving. Another, but not like him. This one was broader, shoulders like tree trunks, fur darker, matted at the ends, scars across the chest, eyes that didn't gleam, they burned. When it turned, Kate felt something old rise in her spine. Like every bone in her body remembered it had once feared fire. Cinder didn't flinch. He stepped between her and the other, held out the cracked spiral stone. The larger figure looked down, said nothing, then reached into a pouch of bark slung at its side. It pulled something out, a strip of leather, wrapped in moss, and dropped it at Cinder's feet. Kate stepped forward, cautiously. The wind picked up, carrying a low hum through the trees. Not voices, not exactly, but the vibration of something deeper than language. The bigger one turned, motioned once to the trees, and from the shadows, others emerged, tall, silent, their faces hidden in hooded fur. She counted 6, maybe more behind the tree line. Cinder knelt, unwrapped the bundle. Inside, the scarf, her father's, frayed, stained. Kate gasped. Her fingers shot to her throat, as if the cold had just caught up to her lungs. She dropped to her knees beside him, trembling. That scarf had vanished the winter he died, gone during that last patrol. She'd assumed the snow had taken it, but it had been carried, kept, protected. The oldest one approached now, the massive one. It moved with the kind of stillness that comes from watching everything for too long. It knelt, eyes level with hers. And then it placed a hand over its chest, then pointed to her heart, then to Cinder. Kate stared, tried to speak, but couldn't. The message didn't need words. He was never lost. He was meant to find her. The fire crackled in the clearing now. Someone, one of the quiet ones, had built it without her noticing. The flames licked high, warm against the wind. Sparks drifted toward the darkened treetops like small stars. They sat around it. Kate, Cinder, the elder. No words, only the rhythm of breath, wind, fire, and the occasional knock. A single knuckle against a branch. Slow, intentional. She began to understand. This was their language, not just sound, but presence. Knocks to say, I am here. Knocks to say, you are safe. Knocks to say, I remember. As the fire dimmed, one of them, young, lanky, with curious eyes, stepped forward and placed something in her lap. A journal, her father's, but different. The pages had drawings added, new marks, translations. He had been learning their way. In the final months before the fall, before the patrol where he vanished, he had stayed, lived among them. And they had kept what remained. Kate flipped through the pages, tears freezing at the edge of her lashes. Her father's handwriting mingled with symbols she now recognized. Spirals, trees, stars. Cinder touched her shoulder. She looked at him, and he gave a single nod. It was time. They walked her back in silence. Halfway to the ridge, he paused, turned to her, and this time, he reached forward, pulled her into an embrace. His hand rested gently at the back of her head, hers pressed against the warmth of his ribs. No words, just breath and memory. And then he stepped away, into the trees. She watched until the woods swallowed him whole. No dramatic sound, no burst of wind, just stillness. Kate reached the cabin by dusk. The fire inside had gone out. She lit it slowly, carefully, sat by it with the journal in her lap, the scarf folded in her hands. Outside, the first snow of the new year began to fall. She didn't feel alone. She never would again. And just before sleep took her, a sound came from the wall behind her headboard. 3 soft knocks, then 2, and a pause. She smiled and whispered back, "I remember." Sometimes the quietest moments hold the deepest truths. Not every story needs to end with thunder or applause. Some simply close like a cabin door after a long winter, soft and certain, echoing the warmth that was shared inside. In a world that rushes and forgets, there is something sacred about choosing to listen, about offering shelter even when the storm isn't yours, about kneeling down beside the strange and the wounded, not with fear, but with open hands. These are not just acts of kindness. They are the acts that keep the world stitched together. What we call mystery, others might call memory. What we label impossible, the heart sometimes calls home. And sometimes, when no one is watching, the wild reaches back. Not to speak in our language, but to remind us of something older than words. That love, given freely and without expectation, echoes farther than we can imagine. We live in a time where silence is rare and wonder even rarer. But maybe, just maybe, there are still places where both survive. In the cold hush between the trees, in the breath before a knock, in the stories passed down not through books or broadcast, but through feeling, through faith. Not everything can be explained. Not everything needs to be. The most meaningful connections are often the ones that cross the lines we draw, between species, between generations, between what we believe is real and what simply is. If this story touched you in some way, I hope it stays with you, in a quiet corner of your heart, in the way you see a shadow move in the trees, in how you choose to show kindness to the unknown. And if you're still here, listening, thank you. Truly, this space we've built, this channel, these stories, it's more than just content. It's a gathering place for those who believe there's still magic left in the world. For those who know that behind every strange knock, every flicker of movement in the woods, there might be something sacred waiting to be understood. So, dear friend, wherever you are tonight, I'd love to know what you felt. Leave a comment if you're comfortable. Let us know where you're listening from, what part of the story found you, what you believe. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep these fires lit, helps more hearts find their way here, helps the stories grow. Because in the end, we're not just telling stories about the unknown. We're building a quiet circle around a shared truth. Kindness matters, wonder matters, and sometimes the knock you answer in the middle of the night might change your life forever. Thank you for being here.